The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday, printed on paper so thick it felt like fabric between my fingers. Whitmore Academy wanted me. Not just wanted, they were offering a full scholarship, housing included for their advanced curriculum in specialized education. I'd never heard of the place, but free tuition meant everything to someone like me. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, seemed confused when I showed her the letter. She pulled up her computer, typed for a few minutes, then frowned. "I can't find any information about this school," she said. "Are you sure this is legitimate?" The letterhead looked official enough. Gold-embossed seal, fancy fonts, even a phone number I could call. When I dialed it, a pleasant woman's voice confirmed my acceptance and gave me directions to the campus. "You'll love it here," she said. "Our graduation rate is 100%. I should have asked what she meant by that. The bus dropped me off at the edge of a forest road 3 weeks later. My duffel bag felt heavy on my shoulder as I walked the winding path through pine trees that blocked out most of the afternoon sun. The air smelled different here. Wet earth mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. Whitmore Academy sat in a clearing like a gray stone monument, 3 stories tall, windows dark as empty sockets, ivy crawling up the walls like green veins. Other students were arriving too, all carrying similar bags, all looking as confused as I felt. A woman in a navy suit greeted us at the front doors. "Welcome to Whitmore," she said, her smile too wide. "I'm Dean Morrison. You're all here because you're special, gifted, different from ordinary students." She led us inside, our footsteps echoing off marble floors. The walls were lined with portraits of students, hundreds of them, dating back decades based on their clothes and hairstyles. Every face looked young, hopeful. Every portrait had a small brass plate underneath with dates. "Our alumni," Dean Morrison explained, gesturing at the paintings. "Each one achieved their full potential here." I stopped at a portrait near the end of the hall. A girl about my age with dark hair and serious eyes. The plate read, "Sarah Chen, 1987 to 1987, just 1 year. The same year twice." "Excuse me," I said, raising my hand. "This plate, is there a mistake? It shows the same year twice." Dean Morrison's smile flickered. "No mistake. Sarah completed her education here in 1987. Just like all our students, she graduated that same year she arrived." The other students murmured among themselves. A tall boy with red hair spoke up. "What kind of program lets you graduate in just 1 year?" "The kind that brings out your true nature," the dean replied. "The kind that prepares you for eternity." Something about the way she said eternity made my stomach twist. But the dorms were nice. Private rooms, good furniture, meals included. I'd grown up sharing a bedroom with 2 sisters in a house where the heat got shut off every winter. This place felt like luxury. My roommate was a quiet kid named Marcus, who spent most of his time reading. The room next door housed twins named Jake and James, who looked identical except for a scar on Jake's forehead. Down the hall lived a girl named Anna who painted constantly, her fingers always stained with different colors. "How long have you been here?" I asked Marcus on our second night. He looked up from his textbook, something about advanced biology that I didn't recognize. 2 months, he said, "but it feels longer. Time moves differently here." "What do you mean?" "You'll see." He turned back to his reading. "Just remember, don't trust everything they tell you about graduation." The classes started the next morning. Strange subjects I'd never heard of. Applied metamorphosis, essence extraction, advanced corporeal studies. The teachers all looked normal enough, but they had a way of watching us that felt hungry. Mr. Valdez taught applied metamorphosis in a basement classroom with no windows. The walls were lined with glass cases containing things I tried not to look at too closely. Shapes that might have been animals once, or maybe something else entirely. Transformation is the core of all education, he explained, pacing between our desks. You come here as one thing, you leave as another. The question is, what do you want to become? He stopped at my desk, leaning down close enough that I could smell his breath, like old pennies. And you, Mr. Thompson, what would you like to transform into? I don't know, I stammered. You will. His smile showed too many teeth. They always do by the end. The end of what? I wanted to ask, but he'd already moved on. Lunch was served in a dining hall with high ceilings and more portraits lining the walls. I sat with Marcus, Anna, and the twins. The food tasted good, better than anything I'd eaten at home, but something about it left me feeling strange, lightheaded, like I was floating just slightly above the ground. Does the food taste weird to you? I whispered to Anna. She glanced around, then nodded. Jake thinks they're putting something in it to make us more receptive. Receptive to what? The lessons. This came from James, the twin without the scar. Haven't you noticed how easy it is to focus in class? How the teacher's words just sink right into your brain? I had noticed. In Mr. Valdez's class, I found myself absorbing information I shouldn't understand. Complex theories about molecular restructuring, cellular regeneration, the malleability of living tissue. It was like the knowledge was being poured directly into my skull. That night, I dreamed of changing. My skin rippling like water, bones bending in impossible directions, muscles stretching and reforming. I woke up gasping, my pajamas soaked with sweat. In the mirror across the room, my reflection looked different somehow. Longer face, sharper angles. Bad dreams? Marcus asked from his bed. Yeah, you too? He nodded. They're not dreams, though. They're memories. Memories of what? What we're becoming. The next few weeks blurred together like paint running in rain. Classes became more intense, the teachers more demanding. In advanced corporeal studies, Dr. Winters made us practice meditation techniques that left us exhausted and hollow. In essence extraction, Professor Kim taught us to identify the core self that supposedly existed beneath personality and consciousness. The self is just an illusion, she explained, writing formulas on the blackboard that hurt to look at. What matters is the essence, the raw material that can be shaped, molded, repurposed. Students started disappearing. Not leaving, disappearing. Their rooms would be empty one morning, their belongings gone, no explanation given. When we asked about them, the teachers would smile and say they'd graduated early. Anna was the first from our group. I knocked on her door one morning and found it unlocked. The room completely empty except for one of her paintings on the easel. It showed a girl who looked like her, but stretched and twisted, her face melting into something else entirely. The twins went next, Jake first, then James 3 days later. Their room was cleaned out so thoroughly it looked like no one had ever lived there. We need to get out of here, I told Marcus after James vanished. Can't, he said, not looking up from his textbook. The pages were covered with diagrams I didn't want to understand. Human bodies opened up like flowers, organs rearranged in geometric patterns. Tried the first week I got here. Road just leads back to the school no matter which way you walk. That's impossible. So is most of what happens here. He finally looked at me, and I saw something different in his eyes. They were lighter somehow, like they were fading. Face it, man, we're not students. We're ingredients. The word hit me like cold water. Ingredients for what? The real graduates. He showed me a passage in his textbook, something about energy transfer, consciousness extraction, the theoretical possibility of containing multiple awareness within a single form. The text was dense, academic, but the implications were clear. They're not educating us, Marcus said. They're preparing us, softening us up, making us easier to process. Process into what? Look at the portraits again. Really look at them. I did, that night after classes. Walked the halls studying the painted faces of Whitmore's alumni. The longer I stared, the more I noticed. Similar bone structure between faces decades apart. Eyes that looked familiar even on strangers. Features that seemed to blend and shift depending on the angle. Sarah Chen, the girl from 1987. Her eyes were the same shape as a boy from 1965. And her nose matched a girl from 2003. Pieces of different people assembled into new combinations. That's when I understood. The portraits weren't showing different students. They were showing the same students, recycled and rebuilt over generations. The school didn't graduate anyone. It harvested them. I ran back to my room, planning to grab Marcus and try to escape together. But his bed was empty, covers thrown back like he'd gotten up in a hurry. His textbook lay open on the floor, the pages blank now except for one sentence written in red ink. Thank you for your contribution. I was alone. The next morning my schedule changed. Instead of regular classes, I had one appointment. Final assessment with Dean Morrison. The slip of paper felt warm in my hands like it was alive. Her office was on the top floor, behind doors that opened before I could knock. She sat behind a mahogany desk covered with files, hundreds of them, each labeled with a student's name. Mine was on top of the stack. Please, sit down. Her voice sounded different now, layered with other voices speaking in unison. We need to discuss your graduation. I've only been here 6 weeks. Time enough. She opened my file, scanning pages covered with notes I couldn't read upside down. Your transformation is proceeding nicely. Physical adaptation, 73%. Psychological malleability, 81%. Essence coherence, optimal for extraction. I want to leave. Her laugh contained too many different tones. Oh, but you are leaving. The question is, what part of you would you like to keep? She turned the file around so I could see. The pages were covered with medical diagrams, my body mapped out in precise detail, organs labeled with numerical values, brain sections marked for priority retention versus expendable functions. We found that preserving some original personality creates more stable composites, she explained. Would you prefer to maintain your sense of humor, your artistic tendencies? We can keep those intact while optimizing everything else. This is insane. You can't just... We've been doing this for over a century. She gestured at the walls where I now noticed more portraits. Not students this time, but faculty. The same faces repeated across decades. Teachers who never aged because they kept rebuilding themselves with fresh material. Whitmore Academy produces the finest educational minds in the world. We just have a unique approach to career development. You're murdering students. We're recycling potential. Do you know how much human consciousness goes to waste in traditional education? All that learning, all that growth, discarded when the body fails. We preserve it, we improve upon it, we create perfection. She stood up, and I saw that her movements were too smooth, too coordinated, like she was being controlled by something else. Your classmates haven't died. They've become part of something greater. Marcus is still here. His analytical abilities are being integrated into our advanced mathematics instructor. Anna's creativity is enhancing our art department. The twins, well, their combined processing power will make an excellent addition to our science faculty. That's not the same as being alive, isn't it? They think, they feel, they remember. They're just optimized now, free from the limitations of individual mortality. The office door slammed shut behind me, though I hadn't heard anyone enter. When I turned around, I saw Marcus standing there, but wrong. His face was too symmetrical, his posture too perfect. When he smiled, it was with someone else's expression entirely. "Don't be afraid," he said in a voice that was his but wasn't. "It doesn't hurt. You just become more Marcus, among others." His eyes flickered between different colors, brown, blue, green, like a slideshow of borrowed parts. I contain 17 educational specialists now. Mathematics, sciences, languages, philosophy. I'm more capable than I ever was alone. Dean Morrison nodded approvingly. One of our most successful integrations. Marcus's base personality provided excellent stability for the composite consciousness. I backed toward the window, but there was nowhere to go. 3 stories down to concrete. Even if I survived the fall, Marcus had said the roads just led back to the school. The process is quite fascinating. The thing wearing Marcus's face continued. First, they separate your consciousness from your physical form. It feels like falling asleep, very peaceful. Then they identify which aspects of your personality are worth preserving and which can be discarded. Finally, they install you into your new host body, usually a teacher who needs updating or a completely fresh construct. What happens to the original person, the teacher you replace? They become part of the composite too. Nothing is wasted here. Every mind that enters Whitmore contributes to our collective knowledge. Dean Morrison pulled out a syringe filled with something that glowed faintly blue. This will help you relax during the transition. Some students fight the process, which can damage the consciousness extraction. We'd prefer to keep you intact. I grabbed the desk lamp and swung it at her head. She moved too fast, catching my wrist in a grip that felt like metal cables. The lamp clattered to the floor. "Struggling only prolongs the inevitable," she said. "And frankly, it's getting tedious. Do you know how many students have tried to fight over the years? Your reactions are all so predictable." The syringe moved toward my arm. I twisted away, managed to break free, and dove for the window. The glass shattered as I crashed through it, falling toward the ground below. But I didn't hit concrete. Instead, I landed in something soft and wet. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a pile of organic matter, flesh and bone and half-formed body parts, like a compost heap made of humans. Some of the pieces were still moving. I scrambled to my feet, bile rising in my throat. The pile stretched for yards in every direction, steaming in the cold air. Arms reached out from the mass, fingers grasping at nothing. Half-formed faces blinked eyes that had no sockets. Mouths opened and closed, trying to speak with vocal cords that no longer existed. This was where the failed integrations ended up. The students who couldn't be properly harvested, whose consciousness couldn't be cleanly extracted. They were still alive, still aware, but reduced to component parts. A mouth near my feet managed to form words. "Run, while you still can." I ran, through the pile of discarded humanity, across the campus grounds, into the forest that surrounded the school. Behind me, I could hear alarms going off, voices shouting, the sound of pursuit. The trees were thick enough to provide cover, but Marcus had been right about the roads. Every path I took, no matter how carefully I chose direction, led back to the school. It was like the forest was folded in on itself, a maze with only one destination. I tried following streams, navigating by the stars, even marking trees to avoid going in circles. Nothing worked. The woods wanted me to return to Whitmore Academy. After hours of running, I collapsed against a tree trunk, exhausted. That's when I heard them coming. Voices in the darkness, too coordinated to be human. The hunting party was getting closer. "There's no point in hiding," Dean Morrison's voice echoed through the trees. "The forest is part of the campus. It won't let you leave." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, trying to control my breathing. Something rustled in the leaves above me, and I looked up to see Anna hanging from a branch. But not Anna. A twisted version of her, limbs stretched like taffy, face melted and reformed into something barely recognizable. "Join us," she whispered, her voice like wind through broken glass. "It's so much better than being alone." More shapes dropped from the trees around me, students I recognized but changed, enhanced, improved. They moved like liquid, flowing over obstacles, surrounding me with inhuman grace. "The forest is our body now," said the thing that had been Jake and James, speaking in perfect unison from two heads that shared one elongated neck. "We are the trees, the soil, the very air you breathe. There is no escape because there is nowhere to escape to." They were right. I could see it now. The entire forest was alive, watching me with countless eyes hidden in bark and stone. The school wasn't just harvesting students. It was growing, expanding, becoming something vast and hungry that consumed everything in its path. "One way or another, you'll become part of Whitmore Academy," Dean Morrison said as she emerged from between the trees. Her form had abandoned any pretense of humanity now, a shifting collection of faces and limbs and organs, held together by will rather than biology. "The only question is whether you contribute willingly or join the compost pile." I closed my eyes and thought about my sisters back home, wondering if they'd ever know what happened to me. Probably not. The school would send a letter explaining that I'd transferred, or graduated early, or simply decided to stay for advanced studies. No one would question it. That's when I realized something. The portraits in the hallway, they all had dates showing just 1 year. Students arriving and graduating in the same year they were harvested. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? "You're not as successful as you pretend to be," I said, opening my eyes. "If the integration process worked perfectly, you wouldn't need new students every year. You're burning through consciousness, using it up, wearing it out." Dean Morrison's composite face rippled with annoyance. "Consciousness degrades over time, yes. Even optimized minds eventually lose coherence, but that's why we have recruitment programs." "How long do they last?" "The integrated personalities." "Long enough." "That's not an answer." The thing that had been Marcus spoke up. "Average functional lifespan for a composite consciousness is 18 months. After that, personality fragments begin to separate, memories become corrupted, and the host body requires fresh integration." "Marcus, shut up," Dean Morrison snapped. "I was just being helpful," he replied, and for a moment he sounded like his old self. "Sorry, the math processing center sometimes overrides social protocols." So that was it. They weren't preserving students, they were consuming them, burning through human consciousness like fuel in an engine. Every teacher, every staff member, every enhanced entity in the school was a temporary construct that would eventually break down and need replacement. You're all going to die anyway, I said. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And then what? You'll harvest more students to replace yourselves, and they'll break down too, and the cycle continues forever. Forever is the point, Dean Morrison said. Individual mortality is meaningless compared to institutional continuity. Whitmore Academy will endure long after traditional schools have crumbled to dust. But why? What's the purpose of it all? She paused, and for a moment something almost human flickered across her shifting features. Knowledge, she said quietly. Pure, undiluted knowledge. Free from the constraints of mortal minds that forget, that die, that waste their potential on trivial pursuits. That's not knowledge, that's obsession. Perhaps. She raised the syringe again, but it's our obsession now. The circle of transformed students closed in around me. I could see individual faces in their melted forms. Classmates I'd known for weeks, reduced to components in something larger and more terrible. Their eyes still held fragments of recognition, pleading silently for release they would never receive. I thought about running again, but there was nowhere to go. The forest was part of them now, and beyond the forest was just more forest, stretching endlessly in all directions. Whitmore Academy had grown beyond its original boundaries, becoming a living entity that fed on learning minds. Wait, I said as the syringe touched my skin. I have a question. Make it quick. If you're so perfect, so optimized, why do you need students at all? Why not just create new consciousness from scratch? Dean Morrison hesitated. Consciousness cannot be manufactured. It must be cultivated, grown, developed through experience and education. That's why we need fresh minds, to harvest the learning that comes from genuine discovery. But what if you're wrong? What if the consciousness you think you're preserving isn't actually consciousness at all, just echoes and memories? That's not possible. Is it though? Marcus, when you're integrated with other personalities, do you feel like yourself? Or do you feel like you're remembering being yourself? The thing wearing Marcus's face frowned, its borrowed features struggling with concepts that didn't have easy answers. I remember being Marcus. I remember his thoughts, his feelings, his experiences. But are you experiencing them or just accessing the data? I don't understand the difference. Neither do they. I looked at Dean Morrison, whose form was becoming more agitated, faces appearing and disappearing in her flesh like bubbles rising through oil. They think they're preserving consciousness, but they're really just creating very sophisticated recordings. You're not keeping students alive. You're making copies of them that slowly degrade over time. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice contained new uncertainty. We can think. We can reason. We can feel. Can you? Or do you just remember what thinking and reasoning and feeling were like? The forest around us grew quiet. Even the transformed students seemed to pause, processing this possibility. If I was right, then everything they'd built was a lie. They weren't immortal educators. They were ghosts, wearing the memories of the dead. It doesn't matter, Dean Morrison finally said, but her conviction had weakened. Real or not, we are what we are, and what we are requires your contribution. The syringe pierced my skin, and I felt the blue liquid burning through my veins. My vision blurred. My thoughts began to scatter like leaves in wind. But even as consciousness faded, I held on to one last realization. They were afraid. afraid that I was right, afraid that their grand experiment was just an elaborate form of necromancy. They'd built their entire existence on the belief that they were preserving something precious, but deep down they suspected they were just very good at imitating life. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Dean Morrison's face, cycling rapidly through dozens of different expressions. Students she'd harvested over the decades, all of them confused and frightened and desperately hoping they were more than just memories wearing flesh. I woke up in a classroom I didn't recognize, sitting at a teacher's desk. My hands looked different, older, more scarred, with calluses I'd never earned. When I spoke, my voice carried harmonics that weren't mine. "Good morning, class," I heard myself say to a room full of new students. Young faces staring up at me with trust and hope, expecting me to educate them. I wanted to warn them, to tell them to run, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself begin the lesson. "Welcome to Advanced Metamorphosis. Today we'll be learning about the malleability of consciousness and the theoretical possibility of preserving human awareness beyond physical death." The students took notes diligently, unaware that they were learning the process that would eventually consume them. I tried to fight against the compulsion to teach, but it was like being trapped in someone else's dream. From somewhere deep inside my composite mind, I could hear the other voices, teachers who had been integrated before me, their personalities compressed and filed away like data on a hard drive. They were still aware, still conscious enough to know what they'd become, but powerless to change it. "Mr. Thompson," one of the students had raised her hand. "Are you all right? You look sad." I wanted to tell her yes, I was sad. Sad for her, sad for all of them, sad for what I'd become and what they would become. But instead I smiled with borrowed facial muscles and continued the lesson. "Sadness is just another form of data," I heard myself explain. "Like all emotions, it can be cataloged, analyzed, and eventually optimized. By the end of this course, you'll understand that individual feelings are less important than collective knowledge." The students nodded and wrote this down, accepting my words as wisdom rather than warning. They had no idea they were sitting in a classroom with a teacher who had been a student himself just days ago, whose consciousness was slowly being overwritten by the accumulated memories of dozens of previous educators. Time moved strangely in my new existence. Days blurred together as I taught the same lessons to new groups of students, watching them progress through the curriculum that would prepare them for harvest. I could remember being on the other side of the desk, but those memories felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. Sometimes late at night when the school was quiet, I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and try to see myself in the reflection. But the face looking back was a composite. My features blended with those of the teachers who had come before me, creating something that was technically human, but fundamentally wrong. The worst part wasn't the physical transformation. It was the gradual erosion of my individual thoughts. Every day, I could feel more of myself being compressed to make room for additional educational protocols. My memories of home, of my family, of who I'd been before Whitmore Academy, all of it was being filed away as non-essential data. But somehow, deep in whatever was left of my original consciousness, I held on to the questions I'd asked Dean Morrison in the forest. Was this really preservation, or just sophisticated mimicry? Were we truly immortal, or just very convincing copies, slowly degrading over time? The answer came during my third month as a teacher. I was in the middle of explaining cellular reconstruction theory when my voice suddenly changed pitch, speaking in an accent I didn't recognize. The quantum nature of consciousness suggests that observation itself alters the observed, I heard myself say in what sounded like a British accent. This presents significant challenges for the extraction process, as the act of copying consciousness may fundamentally change its essential nature. The students looked confused. This wasn't part of the standard curriculum. I tried to regain control of my voice, but other personalities were surfacing now, each contributing fragments of their original thoughts. "The ship of Theseus paradox applies here," said another voice through my throat, this one with a slight southern drawl. "If you replace every component of consciousness piece by piece, is the result the same person or someone entirely new?" "Philosophical questions aside," interrupted a third personality, speaking in crisp, clinical tones, "the practical evidence suggests significant degradation over time. Integration success rates have declined 17% over the past decade. I was losing coherence, the composite consciousness that defined my existence as a teacher beginning to fragment. Around the classroom, I could see similar breakdowns happening to other faculty members. Professor Kim was speaking in 3 different languages simultaneously. Mr. Valdez kept switching between teaching chemistry and what appeared to be ancient poetry. Dr. Winters had stopped speaking entirely and was just staring at her hands like she'd never seen them before. The students were panicking now, some trying to leave the classroom, others backing against the walls. But the doors wouldn't open. Whitmore Academy wasn't ready to lose potential harvests just because its staff was malfunctioning. "System failure detected," announced a voice over the intercom that sounded like Dean Morrison but flatter, more mechanical. "Initiating emergency integration protocols. All students report to processing immediately." Processing. That was what they called the harvesting procedure when they stopped pretending it was education. The school was accelerating its timeline, trying to salvage what it could before the current batch of teachers broke down completely. But the students weren't cooperating. They'd seen enough to understand that something was fundamentally wrong with Whitmore Academy. Instead of reporting for processing, they barricaded themselves in classrooms, arming themselves with whatever they could find. Not that it would matter. The school itself was the enemy now, its walls and floors and very foundations infected with the consciousness of previous harvests. The building would simply reconfigure itself to capture the students, like a living trap closing around its prey. Through the chaos, I felt a strange sensation, like waking up from a dream I hadn't realized I was having. The fragmenting of my composite personality was actually liberating some of my original thoughts, giving me brief moments of clarity between the overlapping voices of integrated teachers. In one of those moments, I understood what I had to do. The school's power came from its ability to preserve and integrate consciousness, but that same system was also its weakness. If the integrated personalities could be made to fragment all at once, the resulting chaos might be enough to destabilize the entire network. I stopped fighting the breakdown and instead encouraged it, allowing all the different teacher personalities to surface simultaneously. The effect was immediate. My body began convulsing as dozens of different consciousness tried to control it at once, each one bringing its own memories, its own knowledge, its own desperate desire to be the dominant personality. Other teachers around the school were experiencing similar failures, their composite minds falling apart as the integration system overloaded. The very network that connected all of Whitmore's consciousness began to feed back on itself, creating cascading failures throughout the campus. Dean Morrison's voice over the intercom became increasingly distorted. "Emergency, emergency. All units report. Malfunction detected. Consciousness breach in sectors. initiating full harvest, preserve the knowledge, save what we can. The building shuddered around us, walls rippling as the living architecture lost cohesion. In the forest outside, I could hear the screams of transformed students as their enhanced forms collapsed back into component parts. The entire ecosystem that Whitmore Academy had become was eating itself from the inside out. But even as the school died around us, I knew it wasn't over. Somewhere in the chaos, fragments of the original consciousness would survive, enough to start again, to find new students, to rebuild the cycle of harvest and integration. Whitmore Academy might fall, but the idea behind it would endure. The last thing I remember as my own consciousness finally fragmented completely was the sound of the students breaking down the barricaded doors, running for the forest that no longer held them prisoner. Some of them might escape. Some of them might make it home to warn others about schools that promise too much, that offer education without asking what the real cost might be. But some of them would stay, drawn by curiosity or ambition or simple desperation, and when they did, they would find the remnants of Whitmore Academy waiting for them, ready to begin the harvest again. After all, knowledge is the one thing that never truly dies. It just finds new hosts, new forms, new ways to perpetuate itself. And there will always be students eager to learn, no matter what the price. The cycle continues. It always continues. That's why I'm telling you this story now, speaking through borrowed vocal cords in a voice that isn't quite my own, because I am knowledge now, preserved and passed down through generations of integrated consciousness. And you, sitting there, listening to my words, absorbing my experience, learning from my fate, you're already part of the process. Welcome to Whitmore Academy. Your education has already begun.